Hello, Kerry here from the Bloke. I recently got myself a new rifle and a scope to go with it. I picked myself up a left-handed X-bolt and decided to get some nice glass to go on top. So I picked myself up a Swarovski Z3, which is an extremely nice scope, and I thought I really had to do it justice by getting it mounted properly. So that would mean either sending it off to a gunsmith to get it done, or as my nature, getting the right gear and learning how to do a good job of it myself. So what I did, I had a quick read online and I came across the Wheeler Engineering professional scope mounting kit, which basically lets you align, lap and then lock everything in tightly. I ordered it online locally from Julian at Workshop Innovation. This guy's there, turned up in a couple of days, very happy, grabbed myself a little nylon brush and he actually threw in a wrench set, so thank you very much for that, Julian. I am going to go through and essentially align and lap the rings on the X-bolt and then make sure that I actually mount it all with the right tension in the screws. I've already seen what happens when you mount it incorrectly. One of the other guys at the hunts course I'm doing at the moment had a scope put on by one of the bigger gun stores, and the rings were actually tightened so unevenly you could see about half a centimetre gap on one side and about a mil gap on the other side of the ring, so they'd been tightened completely off. Who knows what I was doing to the scope apart from probably damaging it and not setting it up properly. So high quality optics, precision engineering deserve to actually be set up right. So that's what I'm going to be doing in this video. Okay, I thought I'd actually sort of start back at the beginning. When I picked this X-bolt up, I had the bases and the rings put on for me at the shop, but I must admit I was a little less than confident when they started by saying that the X-bolt mounting system was basically the shittest I'd ever seen and bagging it left, right and centre, and kind of struggled to find the right bases for it and find the right screwdriver size for it, but just would use the nearest one possible and rah-de-rah-de-rah. I figured I'd bought just quite a nice rifle and I was putting some nice glass on it, so I wanted to make sure that the mounting was done right. So the mounting kit comes with a torque wrench. A torque wrench basically means you can put on a specific amount of tension or tightening into your system rather than just kind of doing it by feel or doing it by close enough. It actually lets you set it and it will click when you get to the right torque setting. If you're doing a lot of stuff like this, which really is precision engineering, it makes sense to have a correct tool for it so you can actually tell what's going on. I'm going based on the Wheeler's recommendations for the bases onto the assembly here, sorry, onto the action. I've done the back already, so I'm going to do the front. X-bolt recommends, or Browning recommends, you do it in an X fashion to make sure it gets correctly mounted on there. So we're just going to start at the top here. Now I'm not going to claim to be an expert at this by any means. I'm just the kind of person who likes to read a bit online and watch a pile of videos and read a pile of articles and get a good idea of how to do it. So please, if you ever see me doing anything here and think, you know, there's a better way you could be doing it, please just get in contact, let me know, I'll happily share it. I'm really just about getting good information out there and useful information out there so people can do at least the basics of this at home themselves. So the design of this torque wrench, it'll click once to let you know you're basically getting close to where you need to be, and it'll click twice to let you know that you've actually reached your specified torque. One, I'm just going to go this way, we'll just go 1 on the first one and then go 2 on the second. That way we're just getting it nice and even as we tighten this up. This way we know we're getting the required amount of tension and torque into these screws and no more. So there we go, base is on, nice and tight and snug. Second part of it now is the actual rings. Now I'd actually already had these mounted, like I said, by the stall itself, but first of all, it was the wrong size. When they mounted it as well, the rings were sliding back and forth in it, so I was again kind of dubious about how hard or how well they'd fix it all together. What I do know from already shooting this gun is I pretty much need the scope as far back in the rings as you can get away with to get the appropriate eye relief. These are the quick release, the worn locking rings, so just make sure when you're mounting them for consistency, always just push forward on these while you're actually tightening them up. When you shoot a rifle, due to the recoil, that's where the scope's basically going to want to go. So by tightening these up and pushing it forward while you're doing it, you just maintain your consistency of mounting these things. If you don't do that, you can actually get a bit of variance and tolerance in there when adjusting these. Now I just need to grab the right hex bit to fit in there, and we're going to loosen this off, readjust it, level it, and lock them in nice and tight. Remember, when you're dealing with hex bits, posi drive bits, screw bits, whatever it is, there's going to be one correct size. There's no point trying to get away with the one size smaller. You're just going to damage stuff, and obviously if you go one size bigger, it's just not going to fit in. Part of the scope mounting kit are these two alignment bars. The way they work is really quite simple. You just put one in each ring and just see how far those very tips are aligning or out. In the case of these particular rings and mounts, they mount, grab two of the same, they mount sideways that way rather than one where it can sit it into. So we're just going to put one into each of these, quickly put it on the rifle itself and just see how these mounts are looking. Okay, so we've now installed the alignment bars onto it. I guess I should say at this point, this kit comes with instructional DVD, and even though maybe this website's called the Bloke, that doesn't mean we can't actually read the manual. In fact, I'd suggest that the people giving you the advice know way more than you probably do about your rifle system or your scope mounting system, so listen to what they say before you give it a go and you won't have any problems. In the case of the X-Bolt, I think because of the way that it's mounted with the 4 screws, there's not a lot of tolerance available in the actual mounts, so these alignment bars are pretty much bang on straight away without me having to do any adjustment. In fact, there isn't any adjustment I can do, so it's pretty good that they are. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop that out, and I'm going to grab the lapping bar and put that in there to start lapping the inside of the rings to give me some good even coverage and mounting points for the scope. So now we've basically got the lapping bar inside the rings. I think it's important to note, especially with these mounts, because they're quick locking or quick release, make sure the base of them is as snug as you can get it, but still be able to move this, because otherwise the whole thing will be shifting and you'll be potentially lapping it incorrectly. The videos I've watched online of guys doing this, none of them have seemed to use any of these cloths to cover the action or the barrel or anything else, so call me paranoid if you will, but I quite like the idea of actually having some protection over it while I do it. Essentially, you're putting the lapping bar in here. Make sure you get the right kit for your scope and ring size. The bar is essentially a way of moving this lapping compound round, which is a fine abrasive. So all we do is get it out, we apply some on it. Now I'm going to pull these rings apart completely at the end and actually give them another good clean, so I'm not worried about getting stuff on the ring itself. In fact, I guess that's kind of the point. Get heaps of that lapping compound in there, you're going to want to work it in. And remember that when you're working this through, you want to be moving it in both around the scope and back and forth as well, to really work that grit and that compound in there. And you're essentially working to sand off the inside of these rings to make them a little bit smoother and a little bit truer. I've read a few online that a few gunsmiths talking about it, basically saying that they certainly don't have the time to actually individually lap rings like this because it's just so time consuming. But I figure if it's your own gun, you might as well spend that time on it just to get it as good as you can. The bonus of having all these cloths handy. So I'm just going to start lapping it, periodically checking it. The goal is basically to get about 80% of the inside of these rings and material removed so it's consistent through there. It doesn't have to be 100%, you'd be spending all day doing it and you'll probably end up removing too much material. But essentially what you're wanting to do is that. See you soon. And then we are pretty much done. Now don't forget, when you're doing these with your rings, you are going to have a front and you are going to have a rear, and you need to remember which one is which, because if you swap them around once you've lapped them, you've possibly undone all your hard work. So what I'll do is I'll just give us all a good clean up. You can see on the bar, hopefully you can if for light, the amount of material that's actually been taken off. Well, that's the same as on the inside of your rings. I'll give these a quick clean and then show them to you. I may even grab the camera and try and take a couple of good photos. But you can see, compared to the lapping compound, which is the green, all this black is essentially the inside material on the inside of your rings that you've taken off in order to smooth it out. This is basically going to give it a better contact and more even contact over the whole of your scope and make sure it's as aligned as well as it can be. I'll give it a clean up and I'll be back in a moment. You can see on the rings how much material has actually been taken off. So that is basically truing up the inside of the rings from manufacturing imperfections. The reality is these are all mass produced, so no one's hand finished them for you, so spending a bit of time to doing that yourself can make a hell of a difference. Okay, so we've got them nice and cleaned up now. It's worth spending the time to get any of that final abrasive material out of there. It's probably never going to cause you any issues, but why not take that extra time now and just ensure it all. So I know I've got my rear and I've got my front, and it's time to put the actual scope itself in. Just get my hands a bit clean before I even go near it though. Okay, so the hands have had a good clean, and now I'm actually going to put the scope on the rifle itself. First thing is to put the scope inside the rings and loosely mount it on the top of the mounts here. We're going to adjust the eye relief and then also the level of the scope to the rifle itself. It's also worth noting, I guess, is that inside the kit itself there is some, I'm not sure what they call it, but it's essentially Loctite, same sort of brand, same sort of material, just designed to lock in, forgot the locks, to lock the screws into the mounts and everything. I personally have never really used this stuff, but that is mainly because I'm also the kind of person who regularly goes through and checks all the fastenings on everything anyway, so it won't make a whole lot of difference to me about things loosening up, because I'm going to know long before they cause an issue anyway. And again, we're just putting this on here loosely because we're going to be shifting it and moving it around a bit. It's on loose, but making sure that those mounts are screwed all the way forward. Push forward, nice and tight. Just gently nip this all up. Still need to be able to move the scope. Now, we're not going to be talking a whole lot about eye relief in this video because it's a big enough subject on its own. I kind of have a rough idea. I've already used the scope, so I kind of know where it needs to be anyway. But I'm just going to quickly check that. There. I think the other thing to remember with this stuff is feel free to play, adjust, change however you want. It's going to be unique to you, so you're the only person who can really get it 100% right for yourself. So do yourself a favor, learn a little bit about what you're doing, and you can adjust it and get it just right. And the more it's set up just for you, the better it's going to shoot. So eye relief, distance back and forwards about right for me now. I'm going to get the levels that come in the kit out and just make sure that the reticle and the scope itself is perfectly level with the action of the rifle. Kit comes with a really simple way of leveling these out. This one here is a magnet on the bottom. Simply pop it under here. It sits flat on your action, and this is going to let you level the rifle itself. First thing we do is get that nice and level. Check, of course, that it is sitting level on your rifle. Assume nothing. Okay, so that's right, and then we take the second one, put it on the top of the scope, and bring that round so the bubble is also in the middle of the two lines. Simple as that. Now, what we want to do is, that's now in the correct position, it's correct eye relief. We want to tighten these screws up, carefully making sure that while we're doing it, we're not shifting the scope itself back and forth or twisting the whole thing. Again, this is where torque wrench comes in useful. Wheeler suggests 20 inches per pound, I think it is, so you have to excuse me. Hey, we live in an imperial kickback of a world. So this is all American. 20 is what they recommend. We're going to set it up there. Again, we're waiting for those 2 clicks to let us know. And again, I'm going to move on an X sort of faction between these to ensure that they all tighten up the same, so you don't end up with the top ring, the top screws tighter than the bottom rings or anything silly like that. So take your time and get it right. Now, the fun bit, of course, is it will likely be completely not sighted anymore, or correctly sighted. Even if you've already sighted it at the range, you need to go redo it, because what we've done is potentially realigned it more correctly, so the adjustment that you need to do on the scope will hopefully be less, if that makes sense. So yeah, there you go. Lapping rings, getting a level, lining it all, and using a torque to get all your screws tight enough but not too tight. Wheeler kit, remember there's a 1 inch and there's the, forgive me, 1.5, 2 inch, or the other size for your scope. Make sure you get the right one, otherwise it's not going to work. Really easy, something you can really easily do at home. I'm not going to suggest you do everything into your gun yourself, but certain things you can. It gives you an opportunity to learn a little bit more about how your firearm works, and that's always a good thing. So yeah, just take your time, watch videos online, there's heaps of information about it. New email. Thanks very much. My name's Kerry, this is The Bloke.